Hello everyone. It's quite late at night, or it's early, depending on where you're watching this. I'm just going to go through a little rack sort of project idea that I'm developing, and this idea is kind of a response, as you can see from the title, Bastel. If you've seen any of my other ones, well, some of my other videos where I've used the Bastel Castle, you'll also you might you might realise that actually Bastel have released a drum module, so I'm going to be getting one of those, but just not quite now. It's Christmas after all. And the way, having watched some of the demo videos, it made me kind of think how I could apply similar sorts of concepts in Ableton. And of course, the big problem solver solution, it's always some form of randomizer, scale plugin, and a rack. It's always going to be a rack. So I thought I'd go through this kind of solution that's in front of me at the moment. I'm not suggesting that that's the the end of the experimentation. It's really just the beginning of it. But I thought it might be interesting to kind of go through. It's late at night. I'm just going to probably ramble, but we'll see where it goes. Okay, so we have a clip. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll realize that the clip is the means by which we generate specific sorts of MIDI events. So this is the rhythm. Okay, it doesn't generate the pitch. Any pitches that we might be looking for will be generated via the random plugin, and then the random plugin, whatever it outputs, is then going to be constrained or quantized by the scale plugin. We've got some velocity sort of randomization going on, just to keep it kind of interesting so that it's not all flat. And then into a rack. So this rack has, let me close the chain up first of all. So this rack has three sort of, I've got to be in the right zone now. Sort of got three sounds. So one of them is this low dirty kick, because obviously first of all I started off thinking about it as drums and it sort of changed. I'm looking for the crossover. That's quite a quiet one. And then finally we have this kind of noise delay. So the three of them together, when we look at the chain is basically based around velocity. So low velocities angle themselves towards low dirty kick. Median velocities are the turbulence, and then higher velocities are the noise delay. That's kind of the idea. So that's the reason why we have this velocity plugin, because it'd be quite difficult to essentially accommodate every sort of velocity change. It's going to be quite difficult to kind of keep varying that. So that's why we have another randomizer in terms of the velocity plugin. So we have 16th notes, so it's continuous, and then we have variable velocity coming out of here. So let me turn the quantizers and the randomizers off. So first of all, we have kind of in roughly the hundreds. If we make that a much lower velocity, like for step 2, you can see here we get a different sound coming up. We get another one there. And when it's at its highest, we just get the hi-hats. Let me put the velocity plugin in. So we can see this moving around now. Okay. So added to this, we have the random plugin and the scale quantizer to sort of generate pitches. So we've got velocity being managed here by the velocity device. Oh, sorry about that. Keep bringing the other windows in. Velocity device, and then this velocity device is essentially doing the key switching. So instead of if you've seen some of my other videos where I've used the chain selector as the means of kind of changing sounds, for this one we're going to use the velocity. So let's have a listen to that. So we've got the randomizer now. The pattern's on 16th notes. We have the randomizer, we have the scale quantizer, and the variable velocities, which are randomized. And this gives us some pitches. Let me just turn that up a little bit. So then to get variations, we vary the clip events. And there you go. So this one here. So that's kind of the principle of the Bastel Castle like drum kit. It's not entirely it, but it's kind of close to how they essentially are able to switch drum sounds. So you have, say, a range from 0 to 10. I can't remember how much it is off the top of my head now. But let's say you have 10 sounds. So those 10 sounds, it's a bit like using a macro in Ableton. So at various points, as you move the dial around, if you modulate it, you get a different sort of drum sound out. If you then angle or bias the velocity, or the, sorry, not velocity, I'm mixing my programs up now. If you bias the CV values favorably towards the higher values, then you get sort of more snares and hi-hats and percussion stuff. And then if you angle it more towards the lower end of the spectrum, you get sort of lower end stuff like toms and kick drums and so on. I think that's roughly how it's, I haven't looked at it for about a month now. So, but my first impression was, you know, kind of make something that is maybe interesting. I don't know. But the thing is that, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I really like Ableton is that you can kind of look at a synth, a plugin, something, think, oh, I must buy it, and then say, but first I'll build it in Ableton and see how far I can actually get and whether that actually quenches my desire to spend more money. I like keeping manufacturers in business because, you know, I would hate to think that they would go out of business, but you know, the solution to the problem cannot always be spend more money. Really, let's face it. So what I then started to do was to think about what it was like if we mapped the same thing, but this time we used different sequences of sounds. That's about as far as I got in this, I'm afraid. Let's have a listen to this one. So this one I've got a bit more, let's have a look at that sound. So we've got a sampler. We still have the turbulence, which is another sample instrument, multi-sample. And we have another multi-sample. So let's have a listen to those. A few more pitches coming through on this one. So less percussive than the first one. The first one was originally my modeling of the drum module. So that's that one. So in number 3, let me just stop that one. Again, same model. I cannot say that I have in any way innovated beyond the initial idea. So we have much more of the sort of the resonating sort of exciter type sort of instrument that we have there in Ope. We have the test tube, so you can see here that this is quite a big old rack. Where is it? I think it's here. Yep. It's a rack nested inside another rack, inside another rack. So you can see this time we're going much more for the, what's that one? Collision. I think it's collision. And then noise tube. So I went for much more of that kind of resonating kind of shell type sort of sound. Let's have a listen to that. I like that one. I also changed the scale as well. Yeah, so I changed the scale in this one. As you can see, the very last note, that it comes back to a G here, because this is the line of G. So whenever a note of say B comes in, it's constrained to G. So that's the idea there. All right, we've only got one more of these to go through. Let's stop that one. So number 4, kick, snare, hat, basically drums. Again, just simplers of kick, snare, hat. What can I say? In many ways, this is kind of a really good way of kind of getting a 16th note kind of drum pattern going. I think one of the interesting things about this type of way of programming drums, different say from using the clip window in terms of like the normal kind of sequencing, pattern-based sequencing, is that it leads to a type of drum programming or drum playing style that's known as linear. So linear drumming is like people like Dave Garibaldi, who's the drummer for Sly and the Family Stone. So you associate it quite a lot with funk music. And essentially what it means is that no two sounds occur at the same time. So if you take a bar and you split it into 16th notes, you won't have a kick and a hi-hat together. You'll have kick, hat, hat, kick, snare, hat, hat, and so on, right? So this approach here sort of gets you close to that. But remember, it's still 16th notes. And it's always going to be randomish. Because it's being driven by velocity, right? Because here, we don't need to vary the pitch. We need to just vary the velocities. Because we're not interested in pitch-based data. As we are with the other 3 channels, which I have interestingly 1 instrument rack, 2, 3 and 4. Sorry, as I said, it's a project that's in it's an idea that's in development, and I'll do probably a more in-depth tutorial at some point, but I thought it would be nice to kind of go through it. So that's the idea of a kind of a linear based drumming. And again, same things. You've got variable kind of clip data in terms of rhythms. Try as 8th notes, or but now you can really kind of detect like how different each bar is actually going to be. Let's try this one, which is the reverse of the previous one. In sort of styles like garage and so on, it could actually be really good, this kind of linear style. It's kind of linear based drum programming approach. If you don't really need the kick to always kind of be on beat 1. Of course, if you wanted it to be on beat 1, I think I'm not sure whether we could. Have to think about that one. Because even if we change the velocity here on beat 1 to make sure that to load the dice so that we know that we get a kick drum. The velocity tool is basically going to give us a kick. In fact, one of the things we could do if you were that way inclined, if you needed a kick drum to be always on the first beat of the bar, you could actually just automate the on-off. So always make sure that a kick drum's on beat 1. You can see it turn off just for the first beat. So you could do that. That would be kind of the cheap way of doing it, that doesn't really sort of take much in the way of, it's not the world's most innovative way of doing it, but it solves the problem, right? The immediate problem at hand, which is essentially, if I was doing a style of music where I always needed the kick on the first beat of the bar, and I wanted to guarantee that would happen all the time, that's what we could do. Again, you could also do a different way. Let's try one more, shall we? Let's clear the envelope. So one other way we could do it is actually is actually bring the random down to 0. But for this one to work, we'd also need to make sure that the velocity of the clip here is low enough that it will actually fall on a kick. Otherwise, if it's too high, let me use it will give us a hi-hat, because the hi-hat is in the higher zone, which is kind of in that 80s, mid 80s to 127, right? So you need to kind of load the deck, or the dice as it were, so that it always falls on a kick drum. Personally, I kind of think that the just turning it on and off is kind of enough. It sounds so lame, right? You just turn it off, but really, one of the things that is like when you do productions, or you're coming around to doing mixes and so on, sometimes we overlook the really obvious things that are just staring us just staring back at us, which are things like turning stuff on and off. It's one of the cheapest ways, in terms of cheap, not because it's lazy or anything else like that, but it's the cheapest cost to the processor, and it's also has very little impact on your workflow and your time, right? Because if time is a precious thing to you, then if you're able to identify those sort of events or sounds or parts of a tune where you think, actually, all I need to do is actually just mute them, turn them off effectively, then job done. Okay, so that's how we would get a kick drum going. Go back to the beginning. So that's the idea. So for the absolute mayhem and just for the fun of doing it, here are all 4 of them together. So remember that they all have the same rhythm. So clip 1 is always 16ths. I love that kick drum, the way it just from the first one, the way that kick drum just drops in like a bomb. It's definitely a percussive sort of tune. If you've ever watched the TV show The Equalizer back in the day, so one of these has got an arpeggiator on it. It's definitely not that one. It might be this one. It's got a beat repeat. You can see here, beat repeat. There we go. Yeah? So that's a nice addition that's in the patch. Got quite a lot of reverb on that channel too. Some interesting complexity with that kick drum on the first channel, where it just keeps dropping in. It's a bit like the jazz drummer Max Roach, who's described always sounding like it was a bomb going off because of his kick drums. Parts of this that remind me of whilst we're in that kind of jazz zone, like something like Frank Zappa, like his Jazz from Hell album. That's all the madness you could do with the sequencer, synclavier. But this is one of those sorts of things, you know, if you were kind of having to create kind of incidental music that just kind of sort of sits in the background, has kind of motion. Sometimes it's a real kind of effort to go, I'm going to have to do the chords, do this, do that, blah, 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 blah. And again, it's one of the reasons why I think Ableton is a fantastic tool for doing, you know, for mocking up these sorts of ideas. I mean, this could be like with the earlier reference with the equalizer, which was the soundtrack was Stuart Copeland, the drummer from The Police. So if you can imagine that being a drummer, it was a very percussive or percussively driven and rhythmically driven soundtrack. He was using a Fairlight Mark II, I think. But yeah, definitely a Fairlight. Now, some of the things you can do, because we have at least some pitch-based stuff, the possibility exists to kind of redesign the scales, so we can do that. You can also find ways of making, of transposing it into, say, different keys. I mean, so some of the sorts of keys that are sort of complementary to each other in terms of superimpositions. So we take, say, you superimpose one sound on top of another, right? So we superimpose one type of scale on top of another. So the relationship of a fifth is actually quite a good one. So if we have C minor as the kind of the bass sort of layer, we could have G minor, which is the fifth, which is what I've changed here. I'm not saying that this is going to work with this track here right now, but it's the sort of way that you can extend the idea. It gives you a different kind of tonality. Not sure it's the best one to use for that. So let's find one of the other ones. Yeah, maybe this one. This one's got a bit of difference in it as well. Transpose it up 7. Let's see what that's like. So we put these two together. Could work together. beat repeat might get a bit annoying after a while. Again, you could turn it on and off. So I'm going to transpose the transposed one back to 0. Oh, sorry, 0. Octave. So it brings that kind of bass line, sort of comes up into a more kind of heard, you know, more audible kind of level. Bring it back down. Just remember that we're not kind of managing these sounds by their pitches. We're managing them by velocity. So it's velocity key switching is another way of kind of thinking about it. And you'll find velocity key switches in most samples or most samplers, and you'll find it in Contact and various other instruments. So, but here we're using it to modulate the chain. So if we just have a look here, you can see it. So you can see this blue sort of indicator, kind of a cursor, keeps moving around. So that's being modulated, moved around by velocity. And that velocity is random. And that velocity is made over here by the velocity tool. And we always have 16th notes, or at least in these examples, 16th notes in the clip, so that we've got a rhythmic basis. And then pitches are randomized by the random tool. Let's listen to 1 and 4. So 4 is kick, snare, hat. And 1 gives us a strange complement of sounds. So you can mute out racks or chains within the rack. So this is just the kick, snare, hat of 4, and then just the noise delay on the first channel. And remember that both channels, in fact all channels, have 16th notes. I think I've already said it, but it's worth reminding you. So this kind of rhythmic difference is not a product of the clip. It is a product of the randomized velocities, right? Pitches are generated, by the random tool itself. But the velocity plugin here, and you can see this bottom parameter, random, is being used to generate these variable values that essentially modulate the chain, and then result in these different sounds that we hear, but they all feel kind of coordinated. They all correspond in some way because they're all essentially all 16th notes. Random. So kick snare hat and that rather intrusive low kick, the dirty kick. So we could mute out the kick there. It could just be the snare and the hat, or the hat and the dirty kick. So as we've got, I've only prepared a few rhythms in advance, we can also differentiate things a bit more so that the second line of clips essentially works in this sort of dotted 16th note we have here, and then 2/8 notes at the end, so it sounds like this. So you could have some of the clips on 2, some of the clips on clip 1, some on clip 3, clip 4. So let's try that one on 3, that one on 4. Going with a nice line. See what that sounds like. It's kind of less intense. It's still intense, but not quite as intense. Play the game of opposites so that 4 is in opposition to 1. So if 4 is intense, 1 is less so. Good work. We can swap the positions of 2 and 3. It is its own groove. Not quite sure that it's the best groove, but it is its own groove. Some interesting lines kind of come out of it. So let's go back to the first one. So one of the other variations that we have, that we can, an approach that we can apply is that we can essentially mute out some of the notes on the scale plugin so that we only hear specific notes. So if we only wanted to hear the notes C, D, and E flat, which are these first 5 down here in the left corner, then we could mute out the rest So we won't hear those. Shall we? Maybe I should press play. I'm not hearing anything. There's definitely activity. So you can see that the notes that we've selected, or I've selected, I'm not going to include you in this, but the notes that have been selected so they all seem to be in that kind of area. So if we look at the scale tool, we can kind of see if we can influence it a bit more so that the notes that are lower down there you go. So now, having done that, so now we just have C, D and E flat. Not getting many Ds. Getting Cs and E flats. So we get a D. Now we get it. Right? So by increasing the number of choices and reducing the amount of scale, these can be sort of seen as, in terms of the way they work, they can be seen as a kind of a multiplication of options. So that kind of gives us the notes we were looking for. So if we wanted to have now, 5 minutes later, I can say if we want to have just C, D and E flat, then we can have that. Which means that the outputs are going to feel like there's a bit more like the channel 2 has its own little motif. Let's try that with 3. So observing the scale tool, we can see that we've got the notes F, A flat and B flat. Those are the notes that we're seeing. So if we increase scale, it's going down. If we increase choice, it's going down. Let's decrease choice. So we keep it in the upper range. Let's multiply it a bit more with the scale. Increase scale. And let's use add, because add essentially gives us notes above. They basically give us notes above whatever our sort of bass pitch is. Maybe I should have used this with the other one. So let's say we stick with those. Let's say we just have those 3 notes. Those are the 3 notes we're going to hear. it asserts a bit more of a, or it kind of imposes a bit more of a melodic sequence to it, and I use the word advisedly. This isn't necessarily I don't imagine you're going to be going down the streets whistling this one. Let's try it with a transposition. So the distance between these two parts of channel 2, channel 3 is basically a minor third. Let's try add. It's an interesting one. So the compression on the velocity tool or device does affect the sort of the scale of the velocity values that are generated and where they kind of sit. So again, favoring more upper values. My version of Christmas music. There's some interesting spatial sort of stuff going on sometimes with that kind of it's not quite a tom, but it's a high kind of wood sound. It's got very large reverb. When it hits certain notes, you can just hear it. It just opens up. Hopefully you're hearing this in stereo, otherwise the experience is lost. So it's worth recapping. So this is essentially a work in progress, and it's my attempt to model in Ableton what I saw in the demo video from Bastel, who make modular synths, and I've got one of theirs. I've got this one, which is the Castle, which is a complex oscillator in a very small box, which is fantastic. Save yourself 600 quid and spend 80 instead. Complex oscillators on the cheap. It's quite a mad kind of unit, but I really like it. It's not everyone's. It's kind of an acquired taste, I suppose, in some ways, but it's great to sort of bring some quite sort of chaotic elements into your productions. I mean, one of the things that I do is kind of leave it, Ableton and record, and then just keep kind of playing around with the module, and then you go back afterwards and then you slice sort of parts out and then stick them in the library on the off chance on a rainy day that you might actually use them. And these are really good. These are kind of really good devices in some ways, because they get you away from being overly reliant on presets. There's nothing wrong with that. It's very valid. Lots of people do. I do. I know lots of people who do. But sometimes you just kind of want to inject something else into the mix. So this project is really just kind of a response to what they did in their video and how they described what the drum module is doing. So I thought I would try and model that. There are two reasons why I model things. One is it saves me having to buy it. So that's really good, because if you can make your own version that is roughly approximate to what's going on, kind of save yourself some money. I mean, the drum module is about €100, so it might not necessarily be, it's not one of those big ones. So it's not a module that's going to sort of break the bank as such. But it's kind of good to kind of just take a step back when something new is announced. You think, I must buy it. Maybe not. Maybe what you do is you think, how would I make it in Ableton? Or one of the other things that I tend to do is go, has someone already made it in Reactor, like in Native Instruments Reactor? And then you go off to the Reactor community and then see what people have done. And then again, you can also use Reactor using the blocks to essentially model it as well. And then if you have any kind of modular synth type plugins, whether that's like Softtube or something like that, you potentially can model it in there as well. And then of course you've got VCV Rack, so you can use that one. So really you do have a lot of options. It's fantastic to have a box that's dedicated to a thing. I get that, but we can also extend our kind of abilities by actually designing it ourselves, or approximating it at least in design. Trying to capture something of the spirit of it. We might not necessarily be able to map every sort of aspect of the circuitry, but we can do something, and sometimes that can then stimulate you into creating new tracks or new ideas. So this is really what this is. I mean, it's a work in progress. Like I said, I haven't really finished it, and certainly still a way to go. But the key sort of takeaway from this is really the use of velocity. I suppose it's two things I would say, right? So one is that you use clips to generate the rhythmic data. So whatever the rhythmic foundation is that you want, that is something, maybe if you want it to be repeated. For some people, like when you randomize everything, it can feel like it's not really much of a track. So by having something that operates as a constant, to which you then add randomized elements, might be a suitable solution. So worth thinking about. So we have this constant 16th note pattern in this clip one. And then what we have is essentially three sounds. I mean, we could have much more. On the Basel drum module, they have, I think they have 10, might have 12. Sorry, I haven't looked at it for a month. So, but essentially, just as a proof of concept, I use three sounds, and these sounds, by opening the, going to hide the chain there in the rack, opening up velocity, and then essentially ordering the sounds so that they only occur within particular velocity values. So when those velocity values come through, that particular velocity layer, that sound then receives MIDI information, and then noise comes out, right? Something comes out. So those are really the two key takeaways: a constant rhythmic pattern in the clip, and then variable velocities via the velocity device. Added to this, if we need pitches, then these are further randomized using the random plugin, And then we use the scale tool or the scale device to essentially constrain or quantize those outputs. And then essentially it's rinse and repeat. I mean, the places where we get some choice is really what sounds do we want to hear. Okay, so let's listen to it one more time. So I suppose the last thing, well, I mean, there are two more things to come off of the back of this. One is that obviously you can just swap the sounds out, change them to something else, swap out the kicks, snare, hat, the percussion sounds, make them more paddy, make them more bassy, whatever, right? That's what you can do. And so therefore then the last element is essentially capture. I would argue here that if we capture the MIDI data alone, MIDI data is actually meaningless, because the MIDI data, well, it's not meaningless, but in many ways, because it's being randomized, I mean, we might find something that maybe we want to isolate as a pattern that kind of gets repeated all the time. I kind of doubt that. You know, I mean, I suppose part of its interest is the fact that it just keeps bubbling along. So we could capture MIDI, and the way to kind of capture the MIDI, I would suggest, is that you have another MIDI channel, which is going to be the channel to kind of capture everything. Now, the real problem here is essentially that is being able to direct the MIDI from all of these channels into here. So what you will probably find is you need to collect a few channels to be able to basically direct to capture everything. So you would, in the drop down MIDI from, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, put it into monitor in, and then off you go. Audio is more straightforward to capture, because what you can do is use the resampling function here, and resampling will essentially capture all of the audio that you allow to be heard. So if we muted tracks 2 and 3, we would then only hear tracks 1 and 4 would be recorded, because those are the only ones that you can actually that are actually going to the master bus. So that's one of the things that we can do. So, you know, resampling, put that into record. So you can see, I mean, I'm not recording at the moment, but you can see that's what we've got there. And if I yeah, so you can see it kind of changing all the time. Set the levels. Okay, and then drop it into record, and then let it do its magic. We'll go for 16 bars. And there we go. So I'm going to solo the resample track. One of the things about resampling is that actually it's better to name it before you record it. I'm really sorry. I tend to do, I name things sometimes. I'm pretty bad. But then, of course, I don't need to share projects with lots of different people. So I I tend to know what it is that I've done, but anyway, it's not a good habit to have, but there we go. Let's listen to that. It's good. One of the things I like to do when we're dealing with things like the beat algorithm is basically do some transient shaping. So this is essentially the spaces between the hits. So it's the kind of the sustain portion of the sound. So I kind of like to sort of find a place where it just kind of cleans it up. You can kind of hear it. Open. Make it quite tight. Now there is another way of that I like to also achieve that sort of idea. Let me return that back to where it is. So there's a I mean, Arvox is actually really good waves. Hopefully this isn't going to crash. I'm not quite sure yet whether live streaming and this and everything else, sort of like how robust it is. Most of the time it's been good, but there are always times where I'm sort of like, should I really use that plugin or not? So this is Arvox. And basically you just bring, it's a no-brainer plugin, right? So you can see that the gate is now on, so the gate is off because there's no signal coming in, right? So you can bring that up. So obviously that's quite extreme. Get it to a place where it kind of just tightens it up. That's without it. And that's just tighter. And then use the compression to kind of do some makeup. Might be a bit too extreme there. Remember that Arvox is essentially originally for vocals, right? So it's kind of made to treat just one thing that's kind of coming in. I mean, there are producers who use it like on the snare. If you want to tighten up the release of the snare, then you can use Arvox. And it's a really good plugin for doing those sorts of things because there are very few controls, so there's less chance of everything going going pear-shaped. So here with this kind of resample track that we've just done, the problem with that is essentially it's a very varied material, so it's difficult for, say, the kind of combination of gate and compressor to essentially manage these kinds of variable sort of program levels that are coming in. But again, you can find some really interesting things that have come out of that. Let's see if we can massacre it a bit more. Use the drum bus. Dry. So in this instance, we might only need to do a little bit. So we might do another compressor going into it, just to maybe a glue compressor is actually better, maybe. Somewhere around about 5 dB. Seems to work, because in many ways it's that kick drum that just sort of upsets the apple cart. It takes care of it, just tames it a bit. I'm not sure it's the way I would go with it, but it's an idea, you know. And the thing is that once you've done the resampling and you feel you've kind of gathered enough of what you have, you can then, you know, kind of save it into your library. That's one of the things you can do. And obviously, one of the other things you can do is put it into a sampler or turn it into a drum rack. And then use it as the basis for the next thing. Let's say we take put it into the sampler, simpler. Where are we? There we go. And basically, just move the start point around. See if you can find anywhere interesting, or find anything interesting. Let's try that. Not too bad. It's a little bit too sloppy there. Move that to the next one. I like the MS2 filter. drive. Use the LFO. Just run it quite fast first of all to just kind of hear it. So you can hear it kind of operating at almost audio rates. Just gonna tighten up that low end. Just brighten it up a bit. LFO is making a bit of difference. The question is whether you want it to run 100%. It's running at 16th notes at the moment down here. So we can run it in threes. That might be a good one. Quite nice. Should we try a frequency shifter? Same LFO. It's just a bit of weight. You can hear it just kind of capture a bit of the, bit more of the higher end of the material. Yeah, definitely on shift. One of the things that I like is, I use it as a, there are a couple really, like those kind of doubler sort of plugins. Or, I like this one, which is the Pitch Me plugin. Hopefully you can hear that. Just kind of have a panned, very sort of short slapback delay. Just widens out the sound, stops it feeling like it's just going through the center channel. So there's that one. I also really like, though this is different now, I like things like the Waves doubler, though that tends to be quite sensitive to sometimes volume coming in, amplitude. So take the direct signal out, so you just hear so you can see channel 1 is -6, they're both -6, they're both panned 45 degrees each, so it's 90 degrees. And then you have the delay. So you have a short delay on one side and a longer delay on the other. And then a direct signal up the middle, which you can bring down if you want to hear more of the left and right as well, or you can hear it so that it's still in the center but wider, right? So there's that as well. Do like those. Things like Echo Boy, really good, really worth trying. Camel Fat, this can tend to be a bit destructive. Let's hope it's not a destructive. Just bring it down a bit. More mayhem. Ooh, I can see it. It is the plugin too far. I can see it in my monitor. It's very weird that it can only run very weird. Let me just get rid of those other channels because they're taking up memory and we're not using those anymore. It's kind of better. So Sound Toys also make, I mean, a variety of ones, you know, crystallizer, decapitator and so on. I mean, you know, they usually have a sale around about this time of year. And if you haven't got them, then really worth kind of getting. I like Little Altar Boy as the as an interesting point to kind of create kind of pitch variations. So you can transpose it. It's not the world's greatest transposer. More saturation. You can do a kind of a quantized pitch. And obviously what you can do also have is a mix between the two, dry wet. So I have that. And then I have my favourite one, the robot. It's quite a dirty plugin. So again, one of the things you can do in the wrong channel. That's why. Just turn that off. So with Little Altar Boy, we can vary. We can automate pitch changes. So I'm just press B for the pencil tool. Oh, picked up the wrong one. There we go. We need the pitch. It kind of asserts some kind of melody. One of the other things you can kind of consider doing, pitching down. It's quite pitching up. Turn the LFO off. That's what it sounds like without it. So you can still hear the frequency shifter. Try that one. Never entirely convinced. I mean, I kind of like using this plugin, but sometimes I sort of think, do I like it? I don't know. But it's full of really just kind of workable kind of sounds and presets. And you can play them in real time, and obviously you can press play and blah blah blah. And you've got things like the swing. Let's go for a 1-bar pattern. Best. Okay, let's try and find something else in the sample. even though we've changed the sounds quite drastically, we do find that the kick drum is quite a prominent part. Right, Daddy calls. I'm going to leave this running. I'll be back in a sec. I think it's just a bit too many chocolates for Christmas. But there we go. We've all been 5. Okay, right, I'm going to wind this up because I have a look where we are. It's quite good like that. I mean, that sound is achieved because of the transposition. I mean, that's it. It's octave higher, 24, 36, 4 octaves, 24, 2 octaves. It's kind of cool. It's got a certain meanness to it. Try on transpose. do like the robot one. So as you can hear, we've kind of started in a very different place with the little tool that was designing. There was an imitation of the Castle drum. And then once we've resampled it and then reprocessed it and then stuck it in the sampler and then kind of identified sections to kind of work with, we end up with something that actually might be workable, might be usable. All right. At some point this project will actually, I'll be doing a video with this project probably, but that was just kind of a look at what is kind of going to be coming along with everything else. And the next stream will be on the 29th of December. So hope to see you then, and take care.